Thank you so much, David, for being with me today. I'm so excited to talk to you about your recent work of a paper titled What Makes Activities Strategic Toward a New Framework for Strategy as Practice Research with your colleagues Shenghui Ma and Violetta Splitter. Um, I would like to kick us off with this intellectual journey of yours as a scholar, and how this particular piece fits into that. So, can you tell us a little bit about your intellectual endeavors and how this paper came about?
Yeah, actually, this paper goes back, or the idea for the paper goes back a long way, actually, after my PhD, when I first got into contact with strategy as practice. So in the early days of strategy as practice. And then at some point, we decided to do a special issue, the human relations special issue, after the first special issue had come out in JMS. And then discussing sort of what to write in the editorial for the special issue. That was the 2007 Human Relations Special Issue on Strategy as Practice.
Mhm.
We discussed, so what is strategic, what is strategy, what are strategic practices? And then, we came from strategy as practice is about the doing of strategy. So we're looking at the doing. So the question was, what doings are we looking at? And then in that introduction, we wrote a narrow view could be strategic practice or strategic doing is things that are related to practice that are called strategic, like strategy reviews, strategy meetings, and so on. But we said that's too narrow. We are looking also at other practices or other activities. We're looking at everything that is consequential for the firm, yeah, and or consequential for the in some way. And
Mhm.
I was troubled a little bit then because I thought, okay, it's true, we widen it, but at the same time, we also narrow it because some strategic practices are not consequential and they would actually drop out. So I always had like a little bit of a feeling that in that early work already, we weren't so clear. And also one of the things we discussed then is also strategy is what strategists do. So you have to be a strategist in order to, yeah. So in some sense, I also felt like, okay, that's again a little bit different. So I was a little bit always unhappy about it, or like felt a little bit uneasy with what we had done, even though I supported it. But I also didn't know exactly why I was feeling uneasy. Also, there was this work by Knights and Morgan, 91, and
Mhm.
there they talk about this macro practice of strategy, which is very much do. There are certain practices that people do, and it's about subjectivities of strategists and so on. It wasn't so much about consequentiality. So I also felt like, okay, some way it doesn't totally fit in. And then
Mhm.
in 2010, I think it was, I was invited to a panel at the Academy and was supposed to give an introduction to strategy. It was a PDW panel, and I was supposed to give an introduction to strategy as practice. And then, sort of in preparing, I thought, okay, how do I explain it? And then, sort of, I came up with this idea, okay, there are different ways of approaching it. I said there are different ways of approaching it. One is you come from the strategists and look what the strategists do. You look at what practices are called strategic, or you look at the consequences. So in some way, I said there are different ways of coming to the same thing. And that's sort of where I started thinking of, okay, different ways of approaching it. And then slowly it merged to me, yeah, maybe it's not only just different ways of approaching it, there might be also different views of it. So, and then this is sort of how I've been thinking about this issue for a very long time, but
Mhm.
never got to actually do the paper.
Yeah, I really admire this long journey of your thinking around, and when it comes to fruition, we usually see the published, polished articles. We kind of don't know what happened behind the scenes, so to speak. to me, this paper is about when the strategy doers meet the strategy viewers or users. And I think this consolidation of knowledge was very needed in our field. Thank you for sharing this journey. So, in a nutshell, what was the kind of inspirational moment for
Yeah.
you to come
Yeah.
about with this paper? I understand this always coming to the papers uh, long story of different spark moments of inspiration, but what was kind of like the force of biggest
Yeah,
inspiration?
actually, the actual force or the actual occasion then was when Paula, together with co-authors, published a paper in organization theory entitled "It's Practice, but Is It Strategy?" And
Mm,
there she addressed this issue very explicitly. So, what are strategic practices? What is strategic? And and building on the original definition, it's activities that are consequential. She extended it and said, okay, but what we mean by consequential is not just firm performance, but it could be
mm,
many other things in which activities can be consequential. And I read this paper with great interest. I thought it was very important, sort of this extension, but I also felt, okay, there's something missing because, again, many activities are not consequential. I mean, you can always see some consequences in some way, but we don't necessarily study them for the consequences. So we might study, I do a lot of research on strategy meetings, and
mm,
they are often not consequential. And it's not, I mean, we can always see some consequences. That's the thing, but I don't study them because of the consequences. I study them because they are strategy meetings. So the rationale behind it is different than the consequences. And
mhm,
I felt like Paula and her co-authors had a very good point about extending consequentiality, but still, it was just one way of looking at it, and there were others. And I
mm,
felt like Paula's paper also posed a kind of danger in the sense that it narrowed down. I mean, it opened up in some sense, but it
mm,
narrowed down in another sense. So in that sense, I thought, okay, now I really have to. Now I write the paper because otherwise the discussion might close too quickly around this consequentiality. So I felt like, okay, I want to present a counter view. And to some extent a counter view, but to some extent an extension. Yeah. So you can look at it as a counter view, but ultimately it's an extension of what Paula and her co-authors did. Yeah.
mm.
And so that was the actual starting point for writing the paper, for finally sitting down and writing it.
Thank you for sharing that. You alluded towards that, and I kind of mentioned it, and I'm gonna try to push the boundary, so to speak. And of course, if you are happy to share, I would love your thoughts, and I'm sure others would also benefit from it. Is it possible for you to share somewhat behind the scenes story of the paper from this idea generation to the publication and beyond? Because the publication is a great success, but the paper goes and leaves and becomes a foundation for many other pieces of work out there. As we see these final products being published, I always wonder what actually is the journey of the paper to the point when we can see it and read it. I would
Yeah.
love your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I'm very happy to say something about it. I'm also very interested always what's behind the scene when the paper comes out. And often I speculate when I see things in the paper, I think, okay, this only came in because there were reviewers asking for it, but actually doesn't fit in so well and so on. So there's a lot of things here. Maybe I can say, yeah. Yeah, so as I said, I had this idea for a long time. And one of the things was it's difficult to publish that kind of paper.
Mm,
it's not a review. It's not really a conceptual theory developing paper. And it's obviously not an empirical paper, so it's difficult to publish something like that because it's an essay, and we don't have many journals that are really open to essays.
mm,
And so it was a long time for me to think about sort of how to publish it, where such a thing could be published, such a format. Yeah, I mean there are
Mhm.
now more places, and SMJ Perspectives is a place. I always loved strategic organization because they have this soapbox essay and so on. And JMS is now doing things. So more and more things have come up that didn't exist really in the past. And also Org Science has also a section called, I think, Perspectives and not Prospectus. Maybe a background. I initially proposed this paper to Paula. A long time ago, I said to Paula, I have this idea about writing about different views. And
Mhm.
wouldn't that be something that we could do together? And we sat down, talked a little bit about it, but then Paula next day told me, actually, I don't really have any time. I can't do it. So she didn't do it, and that's when the paper again didn't move any further. So it just stayed as an idea, and I thought, okay, maybe if Paula doesn't want to do it, it's probably not a good idea to do it. And then when Paula actually did her paper, which took a very different view, which is just the consequentiality view, I thought, okay, now we need to do it. And I got together a great team with Shenghui and Violetta. And that
Mhm.
was probably even a better team to do that. Also because that team was very good in bringing together different competences. Yeah, so I had the basic idea around it. Shenghui was very good at sort of connecting the views to existing literature, strategy literature. Violetta was very good in embedding it in existing strategy literature, doing a kind of review of things and so on. So we really it was really a fun collaboration. Yeah, it was one of the best collaborations I had. And we started initially out three perspectives. We had three perspectives, which was consequentiality view, the nominalist view, so the practice is called strategic, and the role-based view, which is what people do who are called strategists. And then
Mhm.
we came across Robert Chia's work. I mean, we had come across it before, but trying to position it and realize it doesn't fit. And then that caused quite some problems to us and thought, okay, so maybe it doesn't work and so on. Until we then realized actually it's a very different view. He is not sharing one of the other views. It's the pattern, what we came to call the pattern view. Yeah, his view is a little bit connected to the consequentiality view. That's why, because he also has some what seems like consequences in there, but ultimately it's a different view. And when we realized that, that was really sort of a breakthrough for us.
Mhm.
Um, then maybe background to the paper, we struggled a long time how to position the paper in terms of why does it matter? Yeah, we have
Mhm.
these different views. It's good in order to explain what's going on, but why does it matter? Yeah, and we discussed a long time, sort of in what way does it matter, and then we came up with okay, actually, it is different. These different views have different epistemological consequences. Yeah, and that's why it's important. So you should reflect on that. Or also, depending on what view you take, other research questions come up. So and so we that was things we worked around a long time.
Mhm.
Maybe also background to the paper. Initially, we submitted to Oxscience, and
Mhm.
to this section, they have perspectives, which is an essay section, and it got a reject and resubmit. They liked the paper, but they wanted us to fundamentally shift the focus. They said, okay, put the four views up front briefly, say that's in the literature, and focus the whole paper on how the four views connect to literature, to the wider strategy literature. But
Mhm.
that's not what we wanted to do. So then we not resubmitted, we submitted to SMJ and reduced a little bit the connection to other literatures because that caught too much attention, even though it was just a section that we had in there to show that it's relevant, but we didn't want to work it out. So it was just showing, okay, it is relevant because it can connect in different ways and show connections, but we did not want to work on that. And there, I have to say, and that was one of the learnings at SMJ,
Mhm.
it was an extremely nice journey. even though we have our views of SMJ and being narrow-minded and so on, we had a reviewer, we had an editor who was not an SAP editor, who was not from SAP, didn't know so much about SAP, but was very open and constructive. So I think, like in many journals, it depends very much on who you get. And the editor picked excellent reviewers, and all of them were interested in pushing this paper. Yeah, so they were very critical, but in a very constructive way. Yeah, so rather than trying to kill the paper, they tried to really improve it, and that was really good. Yeah, and so they pushed us. And so some of the issues we had, maybe that's of interest, is sort of it's a paper on SAP, but then SMJ is not just SAP readers. And a lot of readers don't know SAP. So the question is sort of, how do you sort of introduce SAP without putting all the focus on the introduction of SAP, because you want to look at something more specific. Yeah. And that was sort of, how much space do you give to introducing SAP and how much space to the actual question? And we also thought it has a dual purpose, this paper. It's a paper to introduce SAP. I mean, it has been introduced before, but sort of introducing it a little bit more and discussing something that is of interest to SAP readers. Yeah. So maybe one of the issues was also how to engage with Paula's paper. Do we present it as an extension to Paula's paper or as a confrontation? And we also pushed a little bit, and that makes it also more interesting. We present it as a counterpoint to Paula's paper. So rather than saying, okay, Paula has done something and we extend it, we said, okay, what Paula did is good, yeah, but there is a huge danger, and we counter the danger of restricting it to this. So that was maybe more a little bit of a tactical move, and to be able to push this paper.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. There are so many learnings in what you already said, and you kind of covered some of the thoughts I had on my mind when you were speaking, what I should be asking you next. There's such a balancing act in what to reflect in the content in terms of what has come before the paper and how to position it to an audience that is familiar but might not be familiar with already what is being done in the literature, and this collaboration with your team that you said was one of your best experiences. I'm very curious about this point, and you told us a little bit about task division, labor division, if you will, among your team. Can you tell us a little bit more about this collaborative, how you all performed? Because this is commitment of many years. Like, we see it published in 2024, but now we know that it has been a long journey.
So initially, the initial idea for it, I had the initial idea for the paper for a long time, and then I got the others involved, and then then it was very much, we had lots of Zoom calls, lots of really discussing it. So in that paper, I would say this paper has been very much based on actual discussions between us, really on Zoom, because we're in different parts of the world. And so we started out discussing particularly why does it matter? So this was one of the big things that we discussed a long time together. What could a setup of this paper look like? What would be the upcoming the framing up front be like? So we discussed a lot of that and had many meetings after each other before we actually started dividing up the work. And once we were clear on also, okay, there's actually 4 views and not 3 views, Chia would fit in like that, and somebody else would fit in like that. We would have the ontological issues later generally in there to show sort of how it matters, the different research questions and so on. Once we had set this out in principle, then we split it up and said, okay, there are 4 views. 3 of them are fairly straightforward. So let's split up the 3 views between us, and each of us reviews the existing literature in terms of how it fits in and what are the research questions and so on. So we each wrote up our section, then compared them, revised our sections, we swapped our parts and reworked them across. And then once we had done that, then Violetta took the fourth view on, which is a very complex view. So she worked on that, while Shenghui worked particularly on the connection to existing strategy research. Because he has a very good view of what is going on, so he could connect it very well, and he's very creative also in coming up with sort of connections. And I worked on the epistemological implications of the different views.
Thank you for
So
this.
that was sort of how we split up. And then I have to say, actually, in the end, the process was quite fast. And so the turnaround at SMJ was very quick. And yeah, so we were very fast. I think we had a major revision. I mean, high risk, but it didn't even say high risk. So it was actually quite nice and constructive. And then the next round was almost a minor revision already. We also all had quite a lot of time, so we really worked intensely on the revision. And it probably also helped. The paper was already quite far developed because we had it at OrgScience before, had one round of revisions coming from there, then reworked it. So when we submitted to SMJ, it had already gone through one major revision, more or less.
Yeah, thank you so much for this insights. I always also wonder, you mentioned this, that there were themes, you identified these three views, then the fourth one didn't really fit from Robert's work. And I wonder whether there's something not included in the piece and still was kind of prevalent in your thinking when you were working.
Yeah. Yeah, so we discussed a lot and thought a lot about the practice perspective. Should we sort of theorize these views from a practice perspective? And we did a little bit of that, sort of what does actually, in practice ethical terms, what does it mean taking this view or that view and so on? So we had a little bit of that, but then our thinking was, strategy as practice researchers themselves take different practice views. Yeah, so they have different practice views. So the question is a little bit, which practice view should you take in order to sort of enrich these different perspectives? And then the other thought we also had is we wanted this to be not only for strategy as practice scholars, but also to the wider SMJ readership. And they might take something out of it, even though they might not take a practice view. And so we took that part out again. I mean, we had worked on it. It wasn't a proper part, really, but that was some of the thinking we had. The other thing we did, we had in there and we took out was connecting the four views more strictly to the 3Ps or the 4Ps, the 3P framework, the 4P framework in strategy as practice. So we had that in there, but it was not that it was not that fruitful, we also thought, and it made the paper unnecessarily complex. And also, it would have meant explaining the 3 or 4Ps first for authors, for readers who are not familiar with the strategy as practice. So we thought, okay, particularly this in this positioning in between strategy as practice readers and general strategy readers, we thought, okay, it's better to take it out. So we took it out, and then the reviewers actually asked, so how does it fit with the 3Ps framework? And that's why we put a little bit of it back in. But just in order to show sort of how one can connect it, but not doing the connections because of those reasons. So that was something that dropped out of the paper. And as I mentioned before, we had the section on linking to other themes in strategy research. We reduced that part considerably in order not to grab the attention of the reader too much, because we're just illustrating how it connects, but we are not spelling out how it connects. Also, one of the issues, once you start spelling out connections, then you get into issues about incommensurability and how you can make them commensurable and so on. But that's that's another issue that, yeah, if it was a book, you could do it, but not in a paper.
There's always constraints in terms of words. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that's a
yeah, yeah.
wonderful and challenging part of writing process and publishing. Um, Looking back, what would you do differently, if anything, regarding the whole paper and how it came about, the collaboration?
Yeah, one thing I would have done maybe, which I'm thinking about, and which I thought about, or we thought about at the end, was we could also have positioned this paper more generally as a strategy paper. So what do we mean by strategy? Yeah,
Mm,
what is the domain of strategy research? Because ultimately, you could say strategy is about consequences, but it's also about doing things that are considered that are called strategic. It's about we could have rather than saying this is a contribution to strategy as practice, we could have said this is a contribution to the domain of strategy more generally. In the same way as people have published papers on what makes decisions strategic, and that's
mhm,
not in a particular stream of research, it's more generally for strategy research. So I would probably, and I guess my co-authors as well, probably have opened it up more.
mhm,
And from the outset, maybe not have written it just as a strategy as practice paper. It was actually the reviewers who pushed us on this point at the very last round. They said at the end, isn't that something that is relevant beyond strategy as practice? Could you open it up and show in what sense it's relevant? And
mhm,
at the our initial reaction was, oh, these reviewers, they always, but it was a very good suggestion. Yeah. And we
mhm,
actually worked on that and made this point in the last part that this is saying something more generally about strategy research. Yeah, but we
yeah,
could have framed it up front already much more in that way, and then probably more people would have found it interesting.
mhm,
And a little tweak, I would probably have changed the title. I would have dropped but that was when it was already accepted and in print. It occurred to me that it would have been nice actually to drop the subtitle when it says I think the subtitle is a new framework for strategy as practice research. And I would have dropped this strategy as practice research, and maybe I just have left the main title and say 4 views on what makes activity strategic. So I think that's
mhm,
enough. And then even with what we have now, it would have been fine. But then it's always, and maybe that's something that's interesting beyond the paper, it's always that the title, I think, is critical in terms of you have to think about what should grab attention, and you want strategy as practice scholars to read it, and others as well, but strategy as practice scholars read it when they read strategy as practice in it. If it just says what makes activity strategic, do strategy as practice scholars recognize that this might be something also for them? So I mean, it's always a little bit of a balancing act what to put in. Sometimes you have long titles where you have all the buzzwords in there, so all the everybody's attention is grabbed from different directions or whatever. So, but I would probably have at least changed the title and
mhm.
left out strategy as practice in order to widen its potential appeal.
I see. Thank you so much for sharing this. Now, on the flip side, I want to ask you, like, looking forward, how would you like contemporary research to build on and extend your work, looking at this piece?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, you always think that your paper is good and is important and so on, but yeah, and I have papers. I mean, I have different papers. Some papers are really that are important to me, and others are not. And this is one of the papers that's important to me. There are many other papers that are not important to me and that I'm not so keen on, but I won't say which ones of my own ones. But there are many that I'm myself not particularly keen on. But this one I'm keen on, maybe because I've been thinking so long about this issue, and I think so. In looking forward, I think the four views help organize literature and systematize the different approaches. I think we have implicitly adopted certain views, but not reflected on them. And even myself, I mean, writing the paper, interesting thing was to think about, okay, when I did this meeting paper with Paula, what was actually the view I was taking there? What's the implicit view in there, and so on. So I think what people should take from it, and what I would hope for, is that they reflect on the four views and adopt the view more consciously, because it has consequences. Because if you take the one view, you will ask other questions than taking another one. Yeah, obviously you can mix the views and so on. You can do a lot of things, but sort of being aware that there's a different logic behind the different views, I think that's quite helpful. And I think this could also lead to sort of, and I think that would be nice if you see sort of clearer streams of research according to views, where research really builds on each other. Because one of the difficulties in strategy as practice research is that cumulative research, because it's so open, which is also because it's not so regulated what you have to do and what you are not allowed to do and so on, that's why it's thriving. But at the same time, a little bit of structure is missing, and I think this could provide some structure that sort of provides and helps cumulative research.
This is super insightful conversation, David. I'm so thankful to be part of it. I'm mindful of time, and I still have this question that I'm wondering about. Are there any insights unique to this article and its journey we spoke about so beautifully, that enriched you as a scholar, that might not have otherwise manifested?
Yeah, one little point, more as a side note, is I engaged a lot with Venn diagrams, because one of the reviewers suggested to put a Venn diagram in showing how the different views overlap and so on. But we don't have three views, we have four views and Venn diagrams. And I couldn't find anything on four views Venn diagram. So I spent a lot of time, particularly with Shenghui, and talking about how we divided work, particularly with Shenghui, trying to come up with a Venn diagram for four views. And so we came up with something, maybe somebody else also came up with the same, but we came up with a way of doing a Venn diagram with four views or four circles, in our case, not circles, but squares. And yeah, so that was a little learning for me, but less to do with strategy as practice. Now, my learning is actually there are some learnings for me. One is I always had these different ways of approaching activities or different views and so on. And one of the things was also, I mean, how do they come together? How do I integrate them and so on? And in the end, I realized, okay, you don't have to integrate them. It's fine to say, okay, people take different perspectives, take different views, yeah, and you can let them stand next to each other. They might establish different research programs. They connect in some ways, and you might do connections, but you can actually, and it's very helpful maybe not to connect them immediately, because it makes it unnecessarily complex. So for me, that was more generally a learning in terms of thinking about intellectual fields. A second learning for me, and an insight for me, was one thing that has always been an issue for strategy as practice researchers, that it has always been criticized that looking at what people do, isn't that just everything? Yeah, I mean, then everything is strategic. And we were always, no, it's not. But somehow we never, or at least I could never say why not. Yeah, okay, because it has to be consequential. But everything is consequential in some way, and so on. So I was always struggling like with this. So how is strategy as practice different from saying organization studies? Yeah, and what I realized here with this is okay, all activities, or almost any activity, can be considered strategic. Yeah, but it's different from saying, okay, then it's everything. But it depends on how you look at it, in what aspect you look at it. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
strategic because it's called strategic, and then you look at what does it mean when something is called strategic, or it's strategic because strategists do it. Yeah, and what does it mean if a strategist does something very ordinary that a lot of people do? Yeah, and
Mhm.
but you look at it in a particular way, and that's so in some sense it's everything, but at the same time it's not everything because you look at a particular aspect of every activity. And
Mhm.
it also showed to me that okay, you can probably sell every work you do on looking at activities as strategy as practice, but the
Mhm.
point, and it's not a trivial one, is to make a case in what sense it is strategic. And
Mhm.
maybe the last point, how should I put it? I mean, here in this paper, we zoomed into a specific question of strategy as practice. Yeah,
Mhm.
what makes an activity strategic in strategy as practice? So we really zoomed in. We looked at the strategy as practice literature, and the more we zoomed in, paradoxically, we arrived at the bigger picture. So
Mhm.
it showed us not only what should we treat as strategic, what activities to treat as strategic in strategy as practice, but in the end, it opened up and said, so what is the domain of strategy research more generally? And
Mhm.
in what we did, we actually expanded. The domain of strategy research. Yeah. Um,
Mhm.
Not every perspective will cater to all aspects of this domain, and strategy as practice obviously caters to all these domain or all these parts of the domain. But generally, it says I learned from that, and that was really a key insight for me. Sometimes by zooming into something, you learn something about the wider picture.
Mhm. Wonderfully said. In closing, I want to open up to any of the thoughts you might have that you haven't shared. Maybe I didn't ask about something. Um, Anything as last remarks to our wonderful viewers out there that you would like to share?
Yeah, maybe a last one, since it's about publishing, and maybe something I also mentioned a little bit. We have our views about where strategy as practice work can be published and who it is relevant to. And
Mhm.
often we tend to go with journals that publish strategy as practice research as read by strategy as practice research. But actually, I would say it depends very much on the particular editors, obviously. But we can publish our work in all the general management journals, yeah, and
Mhm.
in the general strategy journals. And they are not as narrow-minded as we often believe. Is a diversity of people in there, and they have different. They have their different views, and some might be more open, some less open. So I think we can publish our work much more widely than we typically think. And maybe I was. I often have to think about a session we had with editors of different journals for strategy as
Mhm.
practice scholars. And we had editors there who talked about their journals. And there was somebody from organization studies, obviously lots of strategy as practice research there and so on, strategic
Mhm.
organization and so on. And then there was SMJ, and SMJ was Tommy Lamanen. And then Tommy Lahmann said, yeah, we welcome strategy as practice research and so on. And then somebody said, yeah, okay, it's possible, but obviously not if it's Bourdieu. It might have even been me who said it. I can't remember. Yeah, but obviously if it's a Bourdieu paper in strategy as practice, you would not submit it to SMJ, or a discourse paper not to SMJ. And then Tommy Lahmann said, why not? If it's a good paper, if it's well done, of course, also there. And I thought, okay, editors always say that. But my experience is really we have often a very narrow view of what you can publish where, but it's often much more open than we think. And maybe connect to that, it's much more open because if we can make a case that it's relevant to
Mhm.
wider audiences, then they are interested. And I think what we do in strategy is practice is relevant to wider audience. Even the paper that I did, which is focused on strategy as practice and a question in strategy as practice, is relevant to, I would say, to strategy scholars more generally. Maybe that's
Hmm.
a last comment that sort of picks up a little bit on things I've said before.
Yeah, it's a great closing comment. I agree. Thank you so much, David. I learned a lot, and I'm sure others will also very much benefit from our conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was lovely talking to you.